Jumpstart podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 11th episode, we'll talk with Lee Odden from Top Rank Online Marketing. While Lee and I are both Minnesotans, we recorded this episode while we were both on the East Coast of the U.S. Lee was in New York and I was in Jacksonville. I'm recording this intro today from Aruba, and it's actually the last thing between me and going out and getting some sun. So, Lee Odden is someone who is an icon in my native Minnesota, both because of his agency, Top Rank, and because he's built an international audience over the past 15 plus years in online marketing. His contribution to the industry has not only elevated his profile, but also the profile for Minnesotans as well. It's funny because whenever I would go to a conference anywhere across the United States or even internationally, I'd tell somebody I was from Minnesota, and they'd say, "Oh, do you know Lee Odden?" It was always comforting to not have to explain to somebody what Minnesota was or hear some joke about the cold. So thanks for being a pioneer, Lee. You could also say that I've been following Lee's path throughout my entire career in online marketing. And it's because as I was getting started in the industry, I first turned to local resources to get started. And Lee was one of the few examples that I had available to follow from a local standpoint. So it was nice to hear Lee's story. Of course, I have my own ideas as to how things developed for Lee, but I also wanted to get a direct understanding from him about how things came about to be how they were along the way. It was an honor to be able to talk with Lee and hear about how he made the journey into a noted author, agency owner, and keynote speaker. And it also wasn't at all what I expected. But before we get into Lee's journey, I wanted to have a word from our unofficial sponsor. So this podcast is unofficially sponsored by iTunes. Specifically, leaving a review for this podcast on iTunes. At the time that I record this, I see that 6 reviews have come in, which is good, but I want to see more. So please do leave a review. If you haven't already, you know who you are. So thanks for leaving a review in advance. All right, let's talk to Lee Odden. We're going to learn about how Lee was able to see the future several times in his career, the equal importance of passion and structure, and also we're going to get some awesome quotes about the importance of maturity in marketing. While we were recording this call, I had some technical difficulties. Specifically, I couldn't hear all of his responses over Skype, so I had to guess a little bit as to what he was saying. But through the magic of my awesome editor, Bo, we were able to get things to sound great for the podcast. So for show notes, visit jeffalytics.com/Lee. Hey, we're here today with Lee Odden. Lee, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here, Jeff.
Yeah, it's great to have you as well. And it's been a little bit of work trying to get you on the podcast because you're such a busy guy. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. And we'll talk more about why you're so busy and everything as we go through this. But first, I wanted to learn a little bit about your start in this area and in the industry. And the first question I like to ask is, when did you know that this was a career path for you in the digital marketing space? When was the first time you worked on a project or that you had somebody that you got the feedback that you said, this is really where I want to put my focus and energy into?
That's an interesting question because I'm not sure there was any singular moment. I had an opportunity to try a couple of different things after I had finished university and found myself following a combination of pursuits. I'm a very curious person. I love technology. I'm very interested in people and trends, and my degree was in an interdepartmental degree in sociology, industrial psychology, and business, and I thought about getting into organizational development. But my work, as I was going through college, kind of brought me in other directions. So really, I ended up in a technology role and kind of fell into marketing. And it was so curious, this cycle of hypothesis, implementation, and iterative improvement, that exercise and that challenge and the measurable effect of you putting things into action was very exciting for me, and it still is, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of in the late 90s, I had moved out of a sort of outside sales career and started working for a company that was selling websites to vertical markets, templates, if you will, and found myself in a sales role there, taught myself basic web dev, and people wanted to know how to get traffic to those websites I was making them. And so that's where SEO came into play. And so I started playing around with SEO in 97, 98, and that was sort of the beginning, I guess. If we were going to pick a moment, I found that exercise of chasing search visibility and driving the satisfaction of successfully driving search traffic to clients' websites and having them give you that feedback, like, wow, this is amazing, probably was my hook.
Yeah, so the effort of just trying to figure out how this works, tinkering around with things, and then seeing almost immediate results, and then seeing how that affects people is probably an aha moment for you then.
Yeah, I think so. And people go through levels of maturity, I think, a professional maturity and career maturity. At the time, it was really about, well, how do I do this? And that sort of evolved after learning a variety of other disciplines in the marketing field and getting to work with other smart people like my business partner and wife, Susan Michikanis, who kind of came into this from a client side. And she had been a director of marketing for numerous companies and was a VP of marketing for a technology company. So some of her insight kind of rubbed off on me, her expertise with direct marketing and public relations, that sort of thing. But there's a maturity that I think that occurs and that goes beyond how do you do this to original thought. And
Yep.
that's something where passion has really been sparked for me personally, is thinking, truly thinking about long form trends, taking data into and experience into consideration and coming up with original ideas, which, to be honest, Jeff, these days is not as common as you might think. There's an awful lot of copying, blatant duplication of ideas and that sort of thing because there's so many people in the business. So I was really
Yep.
interested in the notion of expressing original thought, implementing ideas, and seeing where that takes a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point you're making, is that if you're entering into the industry now, 2015, it's a different set of parameters we're working with than it was back in 97 or even the Y2K era. And it's really, you have to really be different now in order to stand out. Absolutely. And even then you had to be different in order to stand out.
Sure, sure. And there's a commoditization of ideas that occurs because the ubiquitous connectivity and the prolific. So many people are prolific in creating content because they're empowered with the ability to publish through so many devices. I mean, I know you know this. You can do a lot with a cell phone, right? And you're
Yeah.
on. Just moments ago, we were trading messages. I was walking down 7th Avenue in New York, right? And like, oh, these are the questions I'm going to be talking about, maybe, and
Yeah.
whatever. And actually doing some micro publishing, if you will, on the social web. So it is harder to stand out, but what really stands out, I think, is core values, integrity, passion. I just did a survey with our own team members recently in preparation of some recruiting content that I wanted to put together, and I asked them a question: what does it take to be successful at Top Rank Marketing? And the number one answer was passion. It wasn't technical expertise. It wasn't experience in the marketing field. It was passion. And I agree with them.
Yeah. Passion will get you a long way. And that's actually, so that's one thing that I was thinking when you mentioned how you started out with the passion, right? In the getting search engine rankings, and then you surrounded yourself with people who gave you not only that perspective but also additional business context and helped you mature faster. Where passion will get you a long way, but eventually you realize that you need to put some kind of structure around it, some kind of strategy around it, in order to then turn it into a business. And so I think that, like you're saying, I got by for probably 10 years of my career with passion alone, just because I was so interested in it, and it was so, there's so much opportunity in the world of search and analytics that just me being passionate about it had me in demand for quite some time. But eventually, you do need to sort of surround that with a strategy and with saying, what is this? How do I turn this into a business in that type of area?
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. My days of search only was probably 97 till 2007, 2008, something like
Yep.
that.
Mm-hmm.
And, started to explore how to make search more effective. And, that's when social bookmarking kind of came on the scene and social
Mm-hmm.
networks and blogging and, that sort of thing. And quickly, because of having the opportunity to work some really challenging clients, accelerate knowledge of what marketing really means and
Mm-hmm.
seeing things more from a customer perspective rather than a channel or tactics perspective. And that actually allowed process and structure to marry with passion and create some sort of systems and ability to operationalize best practices. I get to do a lot of experimentation, and some of what I experiment with for our own marketing leaks its way over into the agency services.
Yep.
And we were a PR firm, and then we were doing PR and SEO, and then we were doing SEO plus SEO by itself, SEO plus social, SEO plus
Yep.
content, SEO plus. Well, it's not just SEO; it's more content plus now. Content plus all these things, especially
Yep.
influencer marketing and that sort of thing. So we're
Yeah.
always you have to, with passion, you innovate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a structure is what makes it a business.
Yeah. Yep. And I think with passion alone, it's hard to really, you're always chasing the next thing. So I think, like you said, with a structure, it becomes a business, and then you can see how do we make money off of this, and what's the right format for us. And it's interesting that I think that, especially with the business name Top Rank, a lot of people think that it is about specifically about SEO, but I think I've heard you say several times that SEO is becoming less and less of a focus for you as you get into these other areas.
Well, search is a discovery channel is important. It's a qualified, interaction. It's a qualified buyer in a way because they've expressed interest. There's clear intent through the language they use to pursue an answer of some kind. And so for a brand to be, there at that moment of need is incredibly powerful. So the thing is this, is that customers find solutions in more ways than just search. And so it used to be that obviously you could rely only on search and have a good business, and that's just not what's driving consumer to solution connections anymore. So it's very important.
Yeah.
It's always been important. It's very important. It's just that from an execution standpoint, you're working with a company and trying to architect how can they be, as I like to say, the best answer. Yeah, search plays a big role, but information discovery occurs through other channels as well. And so how do you create an experience? It's like understanding where search fits, where social fits, where direct fits, where PR, where influence, where media, where all those things fit together. So it's that holistic view that represents kind of how we go to market today. And so for some people, there's a legacy memory, I suppose, of Top Rank and being associated with search. But I tell you what, there's a ton of people that don't think that way because they know Top Rank in the context of how they found us as a content marketing entity. Or these days, more and more people are finding us from an influencer marketing standpoint, right? And that's how they know us.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a solid evolution too, is to go through that area. And from a search perspective, search is still very important. I think we both agree with that. It's just that now I think it can be a solid byproduct out of a great marketing strategy. And I think that a lot of people have realized that it's not necessarily a strategy in itself. And so I think when
it works both ways.
Yeah.
Right. There's stuff you can do to help search along, and search can help your other stuff be more effective at the same time. People don't often realize that dynamic. They create content and promote through social in order to attract links to improve their search. But at the same time, they can use search to make their social content more available to increase their social networks. Right? It's a yin yang kind of thing, and a lot of people only think of it one-sided.
Yeah, absolutely. I sort of view you as having been sort of ahead of the curve in a lot of these different areas. Saying, at first starting out with PR, and I'd like to get into that in a second about how the PR firm started and all that, but then going from PR to search, like you said, from search into social and content, influencer outreach, all these different items that you focus on. A lot of these you're sort of setting the market as opposed to riding the market. And that's that's interesting to me how you're able to see that in the writing on the wall and see into the future. And so I'd like to talk about that entire journey if you're willing. But let's maybe start out with the PR piece of it. So you were selling sort of website presences, and you decided to you made the initiative to learn how it works and doing all that stuff. And then you went and started your own PR agency, or did you join an agency?
No, good question. So Susan Michikanis started an agency, and after having been a marketing director and a VP of marketing at a technology company, she and some of her folks that she had worked with in the past had formed an agency called Michikanis and Rogers, and their services mix was a blend of creative marketing, direct mail, email, and public relations. And so how I came into play is that I was with another company, not really an agency per se, more of a technology/agency, but the owner of the company kind of allowed me to develop the online marketing aspect of that business because it was a revenue stream. I felt like I was learning exciting stuff. I was getting to do things I was interested in, and it grew to more than 50% of revenue, custom web dev and online marketing, that was outside of those template websites. And so I decided at a certain point to leave that company, and I was doing independent consulting, mostly SEO consulting. And when Susan started her company, I helped them optimize their site a little bit, but it just seemed to be logical, like when pitching, one particular instance happened where we were pitching BT Centegra, which is the largest division of British Telecom in the United States. And they they were looking for a niche or boutique technology public relations firm, and in pitching them, this notion of SEO was included. And that was 2001, and that was very different. No PR firm was including SEO in a media relations pitch, and the idea was not only can we get, we'll pitch journalists to write about your company, but also we'll optimize your PR content. So journalists who are using search engines to find subject matter experts and cover topics and cover a beat, that will easily be able to find your content there as well. And that just made sense. That's a very scrappy, very savvy, hustle-oriented sort of thing, I think. Anyway, in the end, we displaced Weber Shandwick as an agency. And so I kind of came in as, let's call the SEO thing Top Rank. So it was essentially a product of the PR marketing agency, Michiganis Rogers. And I don't know, and it just started to kind of leak its way into more and more of the things that we were doing, and I ended up, when Steve Rogers left the agency, and by the way, after he left, he quickly hired us, and he hired us at several jobs after that. I kind of moved into the role as a partner with Susan, so search became a part of what we were doing, and digital became a growing area, not just from what I was doing, but other things that customers were demanding or asking for became a bigger part of what the company did. So it kind of evolved. We started to, through attrition of, so to speak, not do as much media relations and do more marketing, customer acquisition types of work. So that's kind of how that change occurred. And in the course of being more effective with SEO, I started really playing around with social bookmarking, because obviously if you could get people to social, at the time, it wasn't just delicious. Remember that? But people would use social bookmarks, and some of the bookmark platforms would actually make a copy of their web page and retain the link. So it was a link building tactic initially. And so I started playing with that and also blogging. And the effect of creating content on our pipeline was pretty darn interesting and very inspiring to do more. And I was a hack of a writer. And simultaneously had no business talking to more than one or two people at a time, and that kind of evolved into me getting involved with conferences and writing a blog. Now, mind you, before I ever got into any of that, Susan had spoken at some conferences, and she had contributed articles and had done more than her share of writing, not about SEO per se, but about other marketing topics. And so, I had a little bit of that exposure before I got into the my thing, speaking at conferences and whatnot. So I don't know, there's a lot, I've had a long career. I mean, it's, 15, 16 years. So a lot have happened in that time. Here's the thing, Jeff, it wasn't like, I think search is the rule and this is the way to go. I have a phrase that the only thing worse than no SEO is all SEO. And so it was at a point in which I decided that, or became aware that customers really are the focus. And what I mean by that, I know that's intuitively logical, but here's the thing. Instead of relying on tactical expertise or practical expertise and being committed to a channel or discipline, I started to realize, what? The answer to all this stuff is simply paying attention to how people discover, consume, and act on information. And that's a central theme of the book I wrote called Optimize. And so the innovation that's occurred from an agency standpoint is driven by just paying attention to broad-based trends, paying attention to what's happening in the industry, driven mostly by what it is that consumers are doing. So it's not just us saying, hey, what's the next shiny object that we can hang our hat on to differentiate? It's more about, look at the data. The data says there's an emerging behavior here in terms of how people are discovering our information, our client information and content. There's a trend here we see in which is revealing some insights here about content consumption preferences related to types and platforms and devices and that sort of thing. So when you pay attention to consumer trends or buyer trends, that plus trends at large, that is what leads innovation, at least for me. And so I think a lot of folks aren't doing that.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And it's interesting because obviously you mentioned earlier that a lot of what you do is listening to feedback and listening to data, and then that's really what forms the opportunities. And it sounds like the blog is a big outlet for that. And so you started blogging before there was a lot of blogs out there, and you were one of the first ones to talk about this area, or at least in the era when there was probably 10 to 20 different blogs you could read if you wanted to read about SEO. And so you had timing there, but not only did the timing play into a factor because you're one of the only ones, but also you had a platform now where you could see what trends were, what people were doing when they visited your website, what they were looking for, what comments were coming in, what was on the top of people's minds, and it gave you a test ground to really see what's going on there. And I think this is an important thing, and this is why I have a blog myself. At least this is why I started the blog, is because I wouldn't want to try those experiments on clients or on other people until I tested it myself. And so having that blog lets you test things, what works, what's out there, and it's really a great seeding area for ideas for what you can bring to the market. Like, what is the market saying to us? And being in the blog and just being in the area of social media, that type of stuff, you can get a lot of really quick feedback from early adopters. And then when early adopters are telling you what they want, that eventually will become the mainstream for the most part. I mean, not everything takes off. You had mentioned Delicious earlier, and that didn't take off like we thought it would. We thought that RSS readers and social bookmarking was the future of the world. Turns out that it wasn't, but it was the precursor to what the next step was going to be. And so I think that being there and being around it helps you figure out what the trends are going to be earlier than anybody else can.
Yeah, that's true. It's a combination of curiosity, ability to have an imagination, being a creative thinker, a deep thinker, so to speak, in terms of thoughtfulness, and also data, and you're right about experimentation. I think it's interesting that a lot of companies consider investing in their own content platforms, meaning like a content hub or something like that, purely for customer acquisition. And they don't think of the long-term value in terms of things like the relationship building that occurs by being an industry authority, or the cumulative knowledge. So there's something that people that have invested in authoring content and the cycle of hypothesis, experimentation, implementation, and iterative improvement, there's a value to the cumulative knowledge one gains over a long period of time by implementing that kind of curiosity and that kind of exploration that you simply can't get just by being a smart person with a big budget. And those individuals or companies that have both a short and long-term view, when they invest in creating a content hub and look at, sure, it should feed lead gen, it should feed demand gen initiatives, creating brand awareness and feeding answers to buyers at different stages of the buying cycle. But at the same time, just like you say, it should be a platform for experimentation. And the long-term insights you gain from that are absolutely freaking priceless and a great way to differentiate. The thing is, no one wants to invest long-term, or few people want to invest long-term. But those that do, they see the benefits all the way to the bank.
Yep. And that's the strategy portion of it, right? I think that a lot of times the tactics are, I want search results, or I want I want to rank in the search, but it is a lot of work that goes into it, and it all becomes part of the strategy, and it's a long-term investment. And a lot of companies aren't willing to do that because they're not judged by their long-term impact. They're judged by their short-term results. And that's where a lot of companies will either do nothing at all, which is probably the most common thing that happens is nothing, or they will invest in a short-term thing but not really get the results they want. And the reason why I believe in earned media is that it compounds. It's just like compounding interest on an investment. And that is that it doesn't necessarily look that different day over day, but a 5% increase year over year becomes gigantic over time.
Yes.
That's not sexy. I mean, there's no sexiness to a 5% increase in something. People want double, or they want these types of things. But at the end of the day, or at the end of the 10 years of you said you've been doing this 15, 16 years, look at how much further ahead you are than the person who maybe started out in the same place but never made that investment. And that's really the important thing here, is that it's not a short-term thing, especially when it comes to personal brands and personal items and that. But a business could learn from the same opportunities.
Yeah, I think they can. And I think that, having the vision of what's next and what's ahead is what's missing for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
I run into situations within our agency and in general where people are having difficulty with getting someone to agree to do a thing, or the fear of, okay, well, if we implement this thing, then then they're just going to want to do it themselves or whatever. And I'm a big fan of maturity models and say, look, here's the thing. Year 1, it's going to be like this. Year 2, it's going to be like this. Year 4, year 5, or stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. The maturity model you'll evolve into is this continuum. So here's where you are right now. So when you're talking to someone that you need to persuade in that scenario, you position them at the appropriate place in that continuum instead of just in the context of implementing your own services as an agency or if you're a practitioner within a company. And when you paint the broader picture for someone and let them know that, look, you can achieve amazing success, but guess what? There's always another mountain peak. There's always something more. And here's what that looks like.
I know you've implemented this for companies. I don't know how much you can share with case studies, but you have had long-term relationships with clients and customers, and it's been really beneficial for them to employ this strategy. So can you share any examples of that working, or just share like how that investment has worked for companies?
Absolutely. Pick LinkedIn. We've been working with LinkedIn marketing solutions, also sales solutions and consumer. There's three different groups within LinkedIn. But we've been working with Jason Miller in marketing solutions for 4 years, maybe, something like that. And, LinkedIn decided about 4 years ago they were going all in on content. Mm-hmm. And they did that in a couple of different ways. They launched a publisher platform, and they had the influencers and that sort of thing. But in terms of their own marketing, they've made pretty substantial investments in using content as part of their marketing. And I'm happy to say Top Rank Marketing has been a big part of that with in certain ways, especially with LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. So, it's through a combination of their blog, they're doing ebooks and other types of content. It's, Jason especially is an amazing marketer. Jason Miller is a very creative guy, very smart guy. Yeah. And, you don't always find someone who's got this interesting mix of being truly creative, because a lot of time you get these artsy folks and, let's just be creative. And he's got that on the one side, but then on the other hand, he's like, that guy is accountable to revenue. Like, yep. He's there to make money. And of course, he wants to create a great experience for customers. He wants customers to be successful, and that's how to achieve it. But client side, I couldn't think of a better person to get to work with, really. Anyway, and then we have our team, right? Our team has just been kicking butt. And just the other day, we got another, Jason's like, God, you guys really deliver. I'm so happy to work with you guys. And just to get those unsolicited comments from a client is amazing. But through their marketing solutions blog, and again, other content assets that we've been working with them on, and we also work with another agency that does a lot of some of the creative stuff called Scourge. Mm-hmm. And it's a great partnership of success. And the Marketing Solutions Group, I'm pretty sure they're the fastest growing group in terms of what they've been able to achieve. So I don't know if that's too fuzzy from an example standpoint, but I know when we first came out, worked with them to create the Sophisticated Marketer's Guide to LinkedIn, the first edition had 21,000% ROI.
Wow.
And we had, I think Jason told me, I don't know if it was 9 months after. It was an ebook, and then it was deconstructed into other things. But it was like 4 million, 5 million in revenue. So that's not a lot of revenue for a $100 million company, but for a brand new initiative, for just an ebook, as people would characterize it, not too bad. Not too bad. Well, of course, and the cool thing is they continue to run ads on that, and they've come out with a second edition, and we have a whole series, Sophisticated Marketer's Guide 2, and then fill in the blank for the things that LinkedIn's audience is interested in that LinkedIn delivers, right? So that's a great case study, if you will, of something that we're working with a client on that set. And then there's data that we collect that comes out of that. Then there's insights, both from a search and social perspective, that fuels continuous optimization of marketing performance.
Yeah. Well, and usually when you look at these things, it's hard to put an ROI on a piece of content. That's one of the most difficult things for adoption, is to say this is what that content was worth. And so the fact that you have that number, that really helps with further adoption. And I've talked to other people on the podcast who they knew content was important, but they didn't know what was going to happen. So they had to basically do spec work. They had to just take time out of their day or spend long nights and everything in order to get it to work. But it seems like of anybody that I've talked to, that's really the strategy that's working right now is content, and then it's content that's just so good that it lives on long beyond the amount of time we put into it. That can reach millions of people and can generate revenue as well.
Well, I think if you take a modular approach to content driven by sort of an intersection of customer insights, customer pain and goals, and that sort of thing, married with how the brand proposes to solve those problems. When you bring those things together and architect a content plan, you can deconstruct the topics that you want to be that best answer for into subtopics and content types and so forth. So you can put them together like a recipe or a puzzle, and you can launch something like the Sophisticated Marketer's Guide and know that the components that make up that singular piece of content can then be efficiently and effectively repurposed according to the terms, the keywords, and even the messaging narratives that support how the brand wants to be known and what it is that buyers actually want to align themselves with. So there's both an intellectual or sort of technical and an emotional component that come together at the same time with that sort of thing. I was just thinking of another great example. For 4 or 5 years, we've been helping to market the Content Marketing World Conference. And, the great example we have from a measurement standpoint, there's a cumulative effect of doing this over and over and over again, right? Mm-hmm. And there's data that we collect and then we refine it. We started doing just one main hub object, and then we expanded that to 3 and then 4. And I think the great example we did a series of 4 ebooks. Each was a hub, so they had infographics and blog posts, interviews, and social content, and all kinds of other things surrounding them, creating momentum. But we had over 200,000 views of the ebooks alone, 4,000 downloads, and 1,000 leads. And the cool thing about that project is that a third party underwrote the whole thing. So that was marketing for us. Mm-hmm. That was marketing for our partner, Content Marketing Institute, and neither of us paid for it. Someone else paid for it.
Nice.
As a sponsorship. You can't always do that kind of thing, but it's an interesting. I never would have thought of having a sponsor or an underwriter for a project like that had it not been through this continuous and iterative approach.
Yeah.
And I love that about SEO people that are not, single-minded. Open-minded and successful SEO people tend to have this sort of I like to call it an optimized state of mind. Right? They're always looking for connections. They're always looking for an advantage somehow,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sort of where we see the industry going, is that a lot of people who were in SEO 2 years ago are now in the content area or getting into it because they see that that's the opportunity. And funny thing is that even before the Google updates that sort of forced the issue, the Panda and the Penguin updates forced us into that area, the ones who were really successful, the best SEOs were always the content ones. The people who realized that content is an important aspect of this, they were always doing content. That's the funny thing about it, is that you were always a content person and SEO was sort of the byproduct. And it took a while for the general industry rhetoric to catch up to that. But you had already made the adjustment because it was already sort of how your plan or how the company was going about things.
Yeah.
All right. So who are some people that helped you out along the way in order to establish this? Was this mostly your own experiments and your own marketing, or was there people that helped you out along the way to get there?
The people that helped me out the most, I guess, were the clients, because they challenge us with problems to be solved. And it is through the investigation of the current situation and developing a strategy and tactics and how to measure performance that really revealed a lot of the opportunities and insights that have driven future programs. So I haven't necessarily had a mentor or anything like that. There are people I look up to, but it's really through experimentation that I've gotten, I think, the most valuable insight. That and just being passionate and having lots of curiosity about this industry, being really invested in not only our agency being successful, but working with other people within the agency and seeing them grow and blossom. That's actually quite satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where the investment goes is sometimes there's no mentor, right? Especially since you were really in the early adopter phase of this thing. There's not necessarily somebody you look up to because nobody's done it yet. It's not really a proven area. And so you can be a mentor yourself, but a lot of times you have to just sort of go based on what's intuitive, and then also answer those business questions. Because obviously, we wouldn't be in business very long if it wasn't for clients making sure that we make them look good. So one of the best things we can do in this whole industry is to make the people that are sponsoring us, the people who are giving us the opportunity to do it, to make them look great. And that will often be enough right there to keep on going. And then obviously, in order to scale a business, in order to scale an agency like you have, then you need to sort of instill those words and that knowledge and what you've learned into others. And so maybe that's where a lot of the focus goes to. And I know that you've done that both with the blog, just by inspiring the masses, a worldwide audience with both your blog and then the speeches that you do, and even writing a book. In addition to that, also probably with your internal team as well. So what was the process like for you, Lee, to write the book then?
I was approached by Wiley acquisition editor who was walking along a corridor with my friend Jay Bear, and I know that he had published a book with them, and she had said that maybe they'd be interested in writing a book with me, or having me write a book for them, I should say. I had already been invited by Pearson and had been courted by an acquisition editor at Pearson for roughly a year, but I didn't really see the value in writing a book at the time because I was blogging and I was already writing a lot and it was successful as far as I could see. And friends of mine that were successful authors warned me at, the lack of, success that is realistic when it comes to writing a book. So I continued interrogating friends that were authors after that Wiley gal who reached out to me made an inquiry. And she was very good at what she does. She's very good at her job, very smart person, very charismatic person. And in combination with her ability to paint the future and what they would be like to work with, and the challenge thrown down in front of me from some of my friends who were authors, I decided, you know what, while the blog has been successful, I'm not really invested. It's not on my bucket list to write a book. I think going through the process and the pain of writing a book will make me smarter, and that may make me more valuable to our customers and to our agency. So that's why I decided to go ahead and write the book. And it became a team effort because several folks on our team helped me write it. I hired Ashley Zeckman to be a project manager, and she literally live blogged me talking about the book. I created a very detailed outline, and she'd come in my office and I would talk about items on the bullet list. Yeah, and so we got like 30% of the book out of my head because of her live blogging, me talking about it. But I spent a lot of nights and weekends writing, a lot of time on airplanes, coffee shops, writing, editing, and so forth.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that feels like an accomplishment to become a published author and to have something in writing with your name on it. That's sort of a really cool, tangible thing that you can take away from this entire experience.
It's not something everyone does, so it does distinguish you in a way. It opens up lots of very interesting speaking opportunities. It's something tangible. The other thing from a lead gen standpoint is that anybody who invests the time in reading a book is investing in your own ideas. There's alignment between what they think and your point of view about how to solve marketing problems. So those become very, very qualified inquiries, if you will. A lot of prospects, so to speak, that we've had have mentioned either hearing of the book or reading some or all of it.
Yeah, it's got to be a nice side effect that comes out of it. And obviously, I'm not sure if that's something you set up for, but to see the business grow as a result of it has to feel good as well. And it goes and can grow beyond, like a book is something that happens. People read at their own pace, and they do feel a stronger connection to books, and they might just off of a blog post or even any type of situation, even hearing you speak or something like that, because they are invested in it or they put time into it. I know we're nearly at the end of our time, and so let's just ask one more question I have for you is, what advice do you have for somebody who is a new marketer just getting into this industry?
Anyone getting into the industry has to have genuine interest in the industry and not just in the benefits of being in the industry. So I see a lot of people who decide after seeing some famous folks in the search or marketing industry that they want to shortcut their way to internet fame or something like that. And so being in the industry isn't just about being well known or something like that. To be honest, if our agency could grow as fast as I wanted to grow and I didn't have to give presentations or write another word, I would be fine not ever giving another presentation or writing another word. I would be just fine. The only reason I do those things myself is because they serve as a very effective way for us to have a good footprint in the industry, and they support our branding goals and they facilitate customer acquisition. So getting in the industry should be for the right reasons, and that is a sincere passion for being able to help customers and being able to, dig into some of the key problems that exist for companies, using your intellect and your emotional understanding and maturity to put it all together and actually create something of value, create something that is thoughtful and meaningful. I think you've got to be really curious. You should. I mentioned before I didn't have a specific mentor, and certainly there are people who've inspired me, people like Mark Schaefer and Ann Hanley and Jay Baer, David Meerman Scott early on, for sure. I think you should find someone that you can follow. Simultaneously, you really need to set yourself up for the ability to experiment. You've got to be able to have your own publishing platform that you can use to communicate your ideas, use as a way to connect with other people, and collect data so that you can iteratively improve your own ability to have an effect on a marketplace or on an audience or a community. Set yourself up for a cycle of learning. I think that's one of the most important things you could do as you get into this industry or really into any other.
So I don't want to take any more of your time. I just wanted to just say thank you for joining me and for being on the podcast. I really appreciate your answers, and I think this is going to be great advice for future marketers to come.
Oh, I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity, and it's always fun to talk about this stuff. You've had some really great great people that you've interviewed in the past, and I'm sure you'll have some great ones in the future. So it's wonderful to be in that kind of company.
Yeah, no, and I'll have some links in the podcast to share with everybody. Some of your, obviously the blog that really started it all, and the book, and some other advice you have. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lee. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.
So how great was that success story that Lee shared in the podcast? A 2,200% return on investment and millions in revenue. Content is important, and as you can see, Lee realized this at just about every phase of his career. It was part intuition, part timing, but most importantly, it was recognition of what he saw in the future. A lot of his success can come down to passion and timing. Being passionate about a topic and having timing down to get involved in the right time. Just remember that timing doesn't start when the case studies and success stories coming out. They come much earlier. Lee talks about how doing this for a long enough time works like compound interest. Getting incrementally better each year doesn't sound like much, but over time, it makes every bit of difference. Thanks, Lee, for confirming this rule and for being an awesome guest, even with our technical difficulties. We'll be back next week with our final episode of Season 1 of Jumpstart. We'll be taking a bit of time off from posting interviews due to the holiday season, and then we'll be back in January with the next wave of awesomeness. That's all for this week. For show notes, visit Jeffalytics.com/Lee.